Hi, my name's Scott Heron, and I'm delighted to join you here in this session 3 of the sustainability series for our World Heritage. I apologise that I'm not able to join you in person due to the time of day. However, I'm grateful to the organisers for inviting me and for allowing me to pre-record this session. You'll see here that this work is also in conjunction with my colleague and collaborator, John Day, with whom I've developed the Climate Vulnerability Index. And this is a tool that looks at climate risk to both natural and cultural world heritage. Climate change has become a threat and is recognised by a number of agencies as a key threat to heritage all around the world. And we see that unveiling in extreme temperature events, glacial melt, we see storm impacts, flooding impacts, wildfires, and intense rainfall events in different World Heritage properties shown here around the world. Some years ago, John and I took upon the challenge to develop a tool to rapidly assess climate vulnerability because it was clear and evident that there was no tool that would undertake to do this and examine, therefore, the risks to world heritage, natural, cultural, and mixed. But this tool had to be consistently applicable to all types of World Heritage properties. It needed to be systematic, but not too complex. And it certainly needed to be proactive because we cannot wait for the impacts of climate change to happen before we act in this space. The tool needed to be able to put climate impacts into context, understanding that there are other threats that World Heritage properties face. And so we brought this together in the Climate Vulnerability Index, the CVI, which is a values-based, science-driven, community-focused, rapid assessment tool. Values-based. The first part and the foundational element of the CVI process is to determine the key World Heritage values. And these are derived from the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value for a particular property. However, we also note that there are values for a property that are not listed in the Statement of OUV. And it's important to have these documented and recognised because climate change is almost certainly affecting these other significant property values as well. To give you one example from a CVI analysis undertaken, this is for the natural property of Shark Bay, Western Australia, where this list of 13 different key values was identified by the project team and the project partners for this application. A key note, though, was that one of these, seagrass, was deemed to be of higher priority in terms of a value because it was foundational and underpinned several of the other values. For example, in ensuring the hypersaline waters and the existence of the stromatolites, in providing food and habitat for marine turtles and dugongs. The CVI approach is science-driven. The initial framework was based on the IPCC vulnerability approach, and you see that diagram here where exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity are assessed, and those elements are incorporated to provide a measure of the potential impact and the assessment of vulnerability. We modified this approach by looking specifically at the vulnerability of the outstanding universal value, the OUV vulnerability, and we look at key climate change stresses that affect the natural and/or cultural values. We apply some modifiers to bring tighter focus to the exposure and sensitivity terms. However, we also found that it was important not just to look at the property, but look at the community associated with that property. And so through this, we analyse economic, social, and cultural connections, our ESC terms. And through those assessments, we derive a measure of the community vulnerability impacted, potentially impacted by a loss of OUV. And all of this together is our climate vulnerability impact framework. Again, it's science-driven because we look at a series of climate stresses that can impact upon natural and cultural heritage. And so here, this list is compiled. 15 of these climate stresses have colours because we found that they were relevant for a large number of World Heritage properties. However, there is space within the CVI approach to also include other context-specific or property-specific stresses. And you'll see on the right-hand side that we include analyses of historical climate variables as well as future projections of those climate variables. Values-based, science-driven, community-focused. As I mentioned earlier with the framework, we include an analysis of the community vulnerability, and we do this by considering the economic connections. So these are the business types directly associated with the property. We look at social aspects for folks who have interacted with the property. And we also look at cultural connections. And this does not necessarily involve an interaction with the property. For each of these, we assess the dependency, the future potential effect of the key climate stresses and the loss of World Heritage values on each of these components, as well as the adaptive capacity. The capacity that is held now by those businesses or by those people groups to adapt in the face of a loss of World Heritage values due to the key climate stresses. We use a risk matrix approach to link these assessments through the CVI framework. So some brief notes on what the CVI does. It does provide a broad assessment. It does consider key climate stresses, and it examines the World Heritage property as a whole. Importantly, it points to knowledge gaps or areas that require further investigation or communication with stakeholders. And it certainly is a great tool to raise awareness and issues that need to be considered in the future. It's also important to recognize the CVI doesn't do a deep dive analysis. It doesn't evaluate all of the climate stresses. It is a rapid assessment approach, and so it cannot undertake the detailed analysis of individual elements of a World Heritage property. It identifies but does not delve into new research areas, and it doesn't provide all solutions, but it does provide a rapid assessment of the climate vulnerability. To give you an example of some output from the process, for the Wadden Sea, 3 key climate stresses identified were the temperature trend, the extreme temperature events, and the sea level rise. And you can see there that assessments of the exposure, the sensitivity, the potential impact, the adaptive capacity of the OUV system were all assessed. And on the left-hand side, that culminated in an assessment of OUV vulnerability in the highest category, high. On the right-hand side, you can see the elements of the economic, social, and cultural analyses. So the dependency, the future change in the ESC components, and then the adaptive capacity, the ability to respond now. And you can see that whilst the combined OUV vulnerability was in the highest category, the community vulnerability was mitigated by these a small degree of dependency and a moderate degree of adaptive capacity. And so that assessment made was moderate. To give some examples of the key climate stresses identified in some of the past applications, for Shark Bay, as mentioned, that analysis revealed these 3 key climate stresses. The cultural property in Orkney revealed one overlap in these 3 key climate stresses. For the Wadden Sea, the identified key climate stresses, this is another natural property that were identified as these. And for the Edinburgh cultural property, we had, again, a different grouping. So in each application, we've seen a different combination of key climate stresses identified and used in the CVI process. At the moment, we're working together with many partners on a CVI Africa project, and this has been funded by a UK government grant. And we're looking at 2 specific applications of CVI workshops in Tanzania and Nigeria. But more importantly, we're building capacity with those groups and through a training course with 6 trainees who applied for and were accepted into the training course. And 6 among many applicants, I should point out. Finally, we have update newsletters on the CVI findings that we publish 3 times per year. And so the next one will be due later this month. We want to give acknowledgement to our many contributors and collaborators, our advisors, our funders. And for more information, we invite you to look at our CVI Heritage website. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share this with you. Bye now.